History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems and supply chains will be deeply affected.
$10 trillion in assets, 1,000 member companies, and 95% of the world's GDP. That's how much the World Economic Forum controls. The most powerful organization on Earth, responsible for orchestrating some of the most diabolical events in history. And you may not even know it. The World Economic Forum brings together the world's richest CEOs and heads of state at Davos every year. But while they claim to be tackling global challenges, they operate as a lobbying powerhouse, where members pay huge fees for global influence. For decades, this organization has been spreading lies and misinformation to deceive the masses, all while profiting trillions of dollars off the back end. And the craziest part is, their rise to power was predicted by a 2,000-year-old prophecy. But I should warn you, this video could get taken down at any moment, so this might be your only chance to uncover the truth. Today, I'm going to expose what this organization really is, their rise to power, and reveal their secret plan for complete global domination. Because if they aren't stopped, your future will be worse than you can ever imagine. Welcome to the dark truth about the World Economic Forum. Before I reveal the forum's secret plan to take over the world, we first need to understand the history of how they accumulated their insane amount of power. The WEF was founded in 1971 by Klaus Schwab, and on the surface, it presents itself as an impartial international organization dedicated to solving global challenges. But when you look closer, the reality is a lot more complicated. They claim impartiality, but with 1,000 member companies and $10 trillion in assets, they wield more influence than many governments. Membership isn't just a badge or a handshake. Companies pay steep fees for a seat at the table. About $23,000 for individual members, and up to $630,000 for strategic partners. These fees don't just buy you access to a newsletter or conference. They open doors to private meetings with world leaders, top CEOs and policymakers at their annual Davos gathering. This is where the real deals happen, far from public scrutiny. If this sounds like lobbying, that's because it is. The WEF structure is built to give the world's most powerful companies a direct line to the people who make the rules. When you hear about the WEF in the news, it's usually in the context of big ideas, ending poverty, fighting climate change, or closing the gender gap. Their branding is all about unity, progress, and sustainability. But the dark reality is that the WEF acts as a platform for the richest corporations and most elite individuals to protect and expand their interests. Some of these members include Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and many more. These aren't just figureheads, they're elite with the resources and connections to actually move the needle on global policy. It's a sinister power structure designed to focus all the political power in the world into the hands of a select few oligarchs. So, what does this influence practically look like? Well, when companies drop hundreds of thousands of dollars for WEF partnerships, they're buying more than networking. They're buying a chance to shape the rules of how the world works. The WEF encourages businesses and governments to collaborate on global solutions, but that often means policies that make the rich richer and put power in the hands of corporations. And when a crisis hits, this process only speeds up.
We have a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions of change.
Take the C-19 pandemic, for example. The WEF didn't just react. They jumped at the chance to launch a new globalist initiative called the Great Reset. They called the pandemic a great opportunity to reset and reshape the world. The Great Reset laid out a plan to overhaul economies, social contracts, and governance, all while the world was distracted by crisis. Now, you may be wondering, how does the WEF maintain its control without anyone noticing? There's barely any public attention on them at all. Because the thing that makes the WEF so effective is their branding. They position themselves as the world's problem solvers, the ones with the answers to poverty, inequality, and climate change. But if you look at the outcomes, their initiatives tend to concentrate wealth and power at the top. The fees, the access, the closed-door meetings, it all adds up to a system where a small group of people can steer the direction of entire economies. Understanding what the WEF is really about changes how you'll see everything. They're not just a neutral think tank. They're a hub for the most powerful players on the planet, and the way they operate fits into a much bigger scheme. This isn't the first time a small group has tried to centralize control over the world's resources and systems. If anything, the WEF is just the latest version of an idea that's been going around for a long time. So, if you think the WEF's vision sounds bold or new, it is worth asking, where did this blueprint for leveraging crisis really start? And how was the WEF established in the first place? To really understand why today's power structures look the way they do, we need to turn back the clock to look at how this whole system of centralized control got started. The idea of using financial crises to push through big changes isn't new. One of the clearest examples happened in the early 1900s with the creation of the Federal Reserve. Most people think of the Federal Reserve as some boring government agency, but its origin story is anything but dull. The Fed isn't actually part of the government. Instead, it's a private institution controlled by the most powerful families in the world. But to understand how this came about, I need to take you back to 1907, when the US faced a huge financial panic. Reckless speculation tanked the markets, banks failed, and people rushed to pull their money out, making everything worse. This was the panic of 1907. The Treasury couldn't keep up. That's when JP Morgan, one of the most powerful bankers of the time, stepped in and used his own network to bail out failing banks. On the surface, it looked like Morgan was saving the day. But the real takeaway was that the US financial system was fragile, and JP Morgan saw this as an opportunity to completely overhaul US banking forever. The solution wasn't hammered out in public. Instead, in 1910, a secret meeting took place on Jekyll Island in Georgia. This meeting included the richest, most powerful people in the world, and combined, they made up a quarter of the world's wealth. It included Senator Nelson Aldrich, Paul Warburg, Henry Davidson, and Charles Norton. They traveled in secret, using code names to avoid attracting attention. Their goal was clear: design a central banking system that would give them major control over America's money. The result of that meeting was the blueprint for the Federal Reserve Act. When President Woodrow Wilson finally passed the act in 1913, it happened in a nearly empty Senate. Critics warned this gave private bankers unprecedented power over the nation's money supply. The Federal Reserve was set up as a system where private credit monopolies, as described in the Congressional Record, managed the country's financial lifeblood. The government had a seat at the table, but the real power was in the hands of these banking elites. Right around the same time, the IRS was created in 1913. This wasn't just a coincidence. The new income tax let the government collect more money from citizens, which made it much easier for the government to borrow from the Federal Reserve. This borrowing ramped up fast, especially when World War I started. The US government needed huge sums to fund the war effort, and the Fed was there to provide it, at interest. General Smedley Butler, in his book, War is Racket, called out that this setup allowed bankers to profit from the chaos and tragedy of war. The more the government spent, the more debt it took on, and the more bankers made in interest from the country paying off the national debts. This pattern of using crises to push through centralized control didn't stop with the Fed and the IRS. Fast forward to 1944, near the end of World War II. World leaders gathered at the Bretton Woods Conference to set up a new global financial order. Out of this meeting came the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. Officially, these institutions were supposed to help rebuild economies and promote stability, but what actually happened was the US dollar became the reserve currency for the world. And these new organizations gave a handful of countries and financial elites a huge say over global trade and finance. The IMF and World Bank have both faced criticism for how they operate. The IMF often lends money to countries in crisis, but attaches strict conditions that end up benefiting wealthier nations. The World Bank's massive infrastructure projects sometimes do more for the global corporations than for the people in the countries they're supposed to help. These institutions, just like the Fed before them, are part of a lucrative system designed to keep power and wealth concentrated at the top. If you look at how these moves were made, the pattern is obvious. Financial panic leads to secret meetings, laws get passed when no one's watching, institutions are created that claim to help everyone but mostly serve the interests of the few who designed them. The blueprint is simple. Use crisis as a reason to centralize control, and then use that control to shape the next crisis in your favor. And it's this exact demonic blueprint that the World Economic Forum is using to this day to establish its control and authority over the entire world. The Federal Reserve, the IRS, the IMF, and the World Bank were all built during or right after periods of turmoil. Each time the people at the center of these systems walked away with more influence than before. So, is the World Economic Forum going to continue this pattern to maintain its economic and political control? Well, yes, but it goes much deeper than that. While researching for this video, I uncovered the real reason the WEF is doing this. They don't just want to maintain financial power. All of these secret meetings, wars, pandemics, and other crises are all leading to the creation of a new world order through what will be the biggest event in history, the Great Reset.
It is changing existing systems. Just think of Uber or Airbnb or of shared economy. It is not a new product, I repeat, but it's a system as such which is changed.
When you hear the phrase Great Reset, it probably sounds like a dramatic plot from a sci-fi movie. But this is the World Economic Forum's real plan, announced in 2020 as a response to the pandemic. They said the crisis offers a narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's from their own website. The WEF wants to use this moment to reshape how the world works at every level. Global, national, and personal. So, what is the Great Reset actually about? Well, one of the most controversial parts of the WEF's vision is the idea that you'll own nothing and be happy. The slogan came out of a 2016 WEF article, which suspiciously has been deleted, but you can still find articles talking about it online. It imagines a future where private ownership disappears. Instead of owning a car, a house, or even digital files, you'd rent everything from massive corporations or centralized platforms. On the surface, it sounds efficient. No clutter, no more maintenance, just access to what you need. Amazing, right? But if you don't own anything, then who will? I mean, someone has to own all the assets, but whoever controls the assets controls the terms. And that means your access to housing, transportation, or even information will be switched off if you step out of line. So instead of saying, you will own nothing and be happy, it sounds like what they're really saying is, we will own you. But you see, the WEF is very sneaky and wraps all of this language about sustainability, equality, and building a better world. They say the Great Reset is about making economies fairer, greener, and more resilient. But when you look at the details, a lot of the actual power shifts upward to governments, corporations, and the World Economic Forum itself. During the pandemic, these ideas moved from theory to practice. Lockdowns, vaccine passports, and digital health passes showed how quickly societies could shift to new rules. With technology tracking who could go where and do what, for most people, C-19 was a time of fear and uncertainty. But for the WEF, it was a chance to accelerate their agenda and test how much control could be centralized during a crisis. However, there's one piece of the puzzle that ties all of this together: money. If you want real control over people, you need to control how they spend, save, and access their resources. That's where the next phase of their nefarious plan comes in. What if I told you the WEF had a secret weapon, an ace up their sleeve, to enslave all of humanity and take control over the world's economy forever? Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs for short, are the final piece the WEF needs to establish complete control over global finance. In the last few years, we've seen a massive structural change in society. Number one, there's been a huge move away from cash. And number two, there's been an ever-increasing centralization. Now, why are the elites so against cash? Simply because cash gives you autonomy over how you use your money. It stops the elites from having any control. However, slowly but surely, this autonomy is being lost, and countries' economies are dropping like flies all over the world. Nigeria, Jamaica, and the Bahamas have all completely changed from using cash to CBDCs. And just recently, Saudi Arabia announced they will be doing the same pretty soon. This is exactly how the WEF will force everyone to switch to CBDCs. The government will force you to switch by no longer recognizing cash. Currently, over 86% of banks are planning on implementing central bank digital currencies. But you may be thinking, central banks want to implement their own crypto. Isn't that a good thing? After all, cryptos are meant to be decentralized, just like the US used to be before the Federal Reserve. And some cryptos are inherently deflationary, with a set amount of them being able to ever exist. When you factor in how inflation has spiraled out of control in recent years, it sounds like the best move for central banks, right? No. Because the banks don't want a cryptocurrency. They want a digital currency. Even though the two may sound similar, they're actually polar opposites. While a cryptocurrency is decentralized, a CBDC is centralized by nature. While cryptos allow you to be mostly anonymous, CBDCs will be an extension of the government. CBDCs will simply be the digital expression of your fiat money. So, why is this such a big deal? Well, actually, there's an enormous hidden threat in all of this. CBDCs will be programmable, meaning that the government will be able to track all of the transactions using that currency. There will be no transparency, no anonymity, rather, all the power will be given to the government. So, what does this practically mean? It means every time you spend $1 digital dollar, the government will know exactly what you spend it on. Here's why this is a major problem. Based on your spending, the government will be able to forge a complete profile on you. And since it's programmable, that means if you do something the government doesn't like, your social credit score will go down, and they'll be able to restrict where you can spend your money. You will be replaced by AI and rely on universal basic income from the government. Not only that, but you won't be able to save, because there will be a negative interest rate on your account chewing away at your savings. This may sound like a dystopian future, but it's really not, and the proof is in the documents. Allow me to introduce you to the BIS, Bank of International Settlements. This is the central bank of central banks, controlling 95% of the world's GDP. Remember what was said about negative interest rates? In a report by the BIS titled Ready Steady Go, they wrote, "International policy coordination on CBDC is set to intensify over the coming years." And in another report titled The Future Monetary System, they wrote to discredit crypto. Structural flaws make the crypto universe unsuitable for the basis of a monetary system. It lacks a stable nominal anchor, while limits to its scalability result in fragmentation. A system grounded in central bank money offers a sounder basis for innovation, ensuring that services are stable and interoperable domestically and across borders. Such a system can sustain a virtuous circle of trust and adaptability through network effects. New capabilities such as programmability, composability, and tokenization are not the preserve of crypto, but can instead be built on top of central bank digital currencies, fast payment systems, and associated data architectures. However, this isn't the end of it all. There's a much scarier plan behind all of this. The central bank can control an additional policy instrument, in addition to the traditional policy interest rate, and that this policy instrument can be used in a counter-cyclical fashion that supports the policy rate. At face value, this may not make a lot of sense, but there is another paper by the Bank of England that commented, consequently, adjustments to the CBDC interest rate would not be constrained by any effective lower bound. The interest-bearing design of CBDC and the obsolescence of paper currency would also contribute to the greater macroeconomic stability because interest rate adjustments would no longer be constrained by any effective lower bound in response to adverse shocks. At the push of a button, the government will be able to make your interest rates negative, meaning that your money will slowly vanish into thin air if you don't spend it. Or, in other words, it will be impossible for anyone to save money. This is how the WEF will keep you in the debt cycle forever and force you to be reliant on the government. The real danger of CBDCs is that there is no limit to the level of control the government could exert over people. CBDCs fit perfectly into the bigger global agenda. The World Economic Forum and the 2030 Agenda promote them as tools for financial inclusion and sustainability, but the details show a different story. If money is programmable, compliance with government or corporate mandates isn't just encouraged, it's required. The Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, and the WEF are all pushing for a world where money itself becomes a tool for enforcing policy and controlling the lives of citizens, not just a medium of exchange. When you put this much power in the hands of a few, the risk of abuse skyrockets. CBDCs are being pushed not because people are demanding them, but because they give unprecedented control to central authorities. It's not just about making payments easier, it's about who controls your ability to participate in the economy. So, what does this actually mean? The rise of CBDCs, the push for cashless societies, and the coordination between the world's most powerful financial institutions all point towards something bigger. Everything that's been mentioned is all part of a plan to usher in a one world government and one world digital currency controlled by a small group of oligarchs. But there's one colossal plot twist. What if I told you that everything mentioned so far was part of a 2,000-year-old prophecy written at the end of the Bible, and it warns us of a future where all this will happen and everyone will be enslaved into the CBDC system?
But control of data might enable human elites to do something even more radical than just build digital dictatorships. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it.
The official story is that the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda in 2015 to create a better world by 2030. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they cover everything from ending poverty to gender equality to protecting the planet. It sounds incredibly noble, doesn't it? I mean, who doesn't want a peaceful, sustainable, and fair world? But here's the thing. What they're not telling you is how these goals are the ultimate Trojan horse to create a totalitarian, one-world government. And the craziest part is, all of this was prophesied 2,000 years ago in the Bible. Remember earlier I mentioned Klaus Schwab's book on the Great Reset? Well, there's a very spooky chapter in that book titled The Risk of Dystopia, where Schwab goes on to write about the technocratic state. Now, if you don't know what that is, I think his argument sums it up pretty well. Consider a hypothetical government that demands every citizen wears a biometric bracelet that monitors body temperature and heart rate 24 hours a day. The resulting data is hoarded and analyzed by government algorithms. The algorithms will know when you are sick even before you know it. They will also know where you have been and who you have met. The chains of infection could be drastically shortened and even cut altogether. Such a system could arguably stop the epidemic in its tracks within days. But does that really sound like a good idea? Wearing a bracelet 24/7 that shares all your information with the government, that is exactly what Schwab and his friends at Davos are planning. And finally, we reach the crux of the matter. Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 to 17. He forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. The end of the era of free will. That is what the elites have in store for you, and they don't even try to hide it. And this is what their strategy has been all along, to hack your brain using information and propaganda. Schwab concludes that section of the book by ominously stating, dystopian scenarios are not a fatality. Furthermore, Schwab ends the book by saying, the reset isn't done yet. So, what's the missing piece of the puzzle? Well, remember CBDCs? Many people believe that these CBDCs will be integrated into a biometric chip that will go on your right hand. Or if you can't put it on your right hand, for whatever reason, then your forehead. These will act as a replacement for credit cards, but will also, just as Schwab said, be able to monitor your health, emotions, and maybe even your thoughts, and send that information to the government. But the World Economic Forum can't just snap their fingers and radically change the entire world like this. No one would comply, which is why they need one more final crisis to push the world over its edge before they can introduce this new CBDC system. And once that happens, the World Economic Forum will be able to leverage their power to establish complete global control. What awaits all of us if we don't do anything about this is a future where all of your behavior is monitored by the government, you are replaced by AI, own nothing, and are happy. But there is one solution. The only key to stopping this is education. Because we aren't powerful enough to stop the forum and their evil agendas. At the end of the day, the only person who can stop any of this is God. But we can still spread the message and warn people about what's to come. So, share this video with your teachers, friends, pet cats, everyone. We need people to wake up to what's happening in the world. And if you want to know more about this and other secrets they don't want you to know about, then subscribe and join the revolution against the globalist agenda.